Hello again. This is episode number 8, essayette number 8, entitled Singing, Acting, and Words, which will tell you that it proceeds directly on from the last episode, wherein I introduced a couple of ideas for exercises, which, as parts of a training program for developing a technique specifically for the discipline of operatic acting, I hope at least conveyed my strong belief that acting is a craft, every bit as demanding as singing itself, and that in opera it must be regarded as inseparable from singing. And so, worked on in a unified way that we have so far uncovered only in bits and pieces, in little spurts. With that in mind, and also staying aware that this topic extends on through two more of these mini chapters called The Character and Drama, I'll read the essayette and take up questions as I proceed. Singing, Acting, and Words. The rather clumsy construction that begins the heading for this section is on loan from the late Robert Lewis, the noted American theater director and acting teacher, who worked with opera on occasion. Run together this way, singing, acting. His term reflects the fact that we have no word for opera's unique and essential mode of communication. This fact, in turn, raises the prospect of a second dichotomy at the very core of operatic expression, a split between vocal and verbal behaviors on one hand and bodily behaviors on the other. Or, to state the difficulty from the receptor's viewpoint, between signals received by the ear and those received by the eye. This second dichotomy, this falling apart of the sung action itself, has been addressed by some of opera's most talented and observant artists, yet has proved extremely stubborn. The reason the second dichotomy has been perceived as increasingly troublesome is that the gap between the physical and emotional commitments of operatic singing on the one hand, and the behavioral language deemed believable on the other, has widened appreciably. The mobilization of energies associated with singing, once not far removed from those demanded by theatrical styles more rhetorical and presentational than ours, have remained more or less the same. But those associated with acting have been radically transformed. The reasons for the changes are at bottom sociocultural, but have found theatrical expression in physical and verbal behaviors of progressively lowered rhetorical profile and projective energy. In contemporary popular culture, camera acting and microphone singing set the standards of credibility for most potential receptors. Both substitute mechanically controlled electrical energy for human vitality to transmit performing intent over distance. The state of being necessary to effective operatic singing remains highly charged and focused on the direction of energy into aesthetically determined physical acts whose demands are absolute. It is like no other condition in life, though it remains somewhat resembling that of a dancer or athlete. The state of being required by most contemporary acting, on the other hand, is a kind of alert receptivity, responsive, but physically casual and intimate. The gap between these states is experienced as a contradiction by the performer in search of an integrated singing acting technique. And hold that thought for a moment of an integrated singing acting technique while I address a question that popped up during that paragraph, asking me to go a little further into this matter of a singer's unique state of being. Well, notice that I compared it to that of a dancer or athlete, and actually contrasted it with that of the theater actor, never mind that of the screen actor. The similarity is that, like a dancer or athlete, the singer mobilizes his or her physical resources, energies, in ways specifically directed toward the powerful yet precise execution of physical acts directed toward an envisioned outcome. The outcome is highly dependent on being able to organize a complex series of high-energy neuromuscular coordinations and then to repeat them at will to be consistent with them. At the same time, the neuromuscular responses must also be elastic, ready to adapt to moment-to-moment changes in the demands put upon them. These similarities between singing and dancing or athletics extend to the fact that in all three, many of the requisite coordinations center around the respiratory system, around the ability to draw on and control breath under conditions not found even in other heightened pursuits. When I speak of, quote, aesthetically determined physical acts whose demands are absolute, unquote, the parallel with athletics weakens because the athlete's goal isn't aesthetic per se, although the relationship between the goal and what the athlete would define as good form or even beautiful form remains strong. And there is still a succeed or fail, and therefore absolute, measurement applied to each act. But the likeness to dance still holds. Like the singer, the dancer must mobilize her body for long, connected series of complex, strong, elastic, rhythmic coordinations that are surely aesthetically determined and just as surely absolute in their physical demands. Either her body can execute the choreography or not. And if not, she cannot dance professionally, no matter how advanced her artistic sensibilities. Finally, the dancer is like the singer, except in abstract or pure dance material, in embodying a character, playing a role in the story. That, in turn, means that the artistic demands are no longer only aesthetic. They are also, perhaps even primarily, dramatic. After all, the telling of the story can fall short aesthetically, even to the point of failing some of those absolutes along the way, but still make its crucial dramatic point, in which case the story still gets told, however roughly. The uniqueness of the singing actor's state of being, of course, inheres in singing itself. Unlike the dancer, the singer is creating music, generating it from his or her own body on the stage, and this music incorporates words, which are being voiced under the extended stresses of the requirements of the vocal range and the sustainment of tone. The physical coordinative demands now center around the larynx. It lies at the bottom of the acoustical complex that forms vowels, produces resonance, and at its high forward rim enables articulation. And it lies at the top of the respiratory chain, where in its valve function, it is responsible for monitoring the flow of breath and the constantly varying degrees of subglottal compression farther down, always in search of balance between its sentry duties as a valve and the workings of the muscular web further down in the respiratory system, what we feel as support, while at the same time organizing the vibrational action, also constantly varying, that produces pitch to begin with, and which is the origin of tone, sung or spoken. So the singer's state of being is that of an alive, alert, bodily readiness for the commission of the musico-dramatic, psycho-spiritual, emotional, cognitive actions that lie ahead of him or her on any given occasion. That's all. Now, back to what I was saying about an integrated singing acting technique. Such integration is desirable on stage for the same reason it is desirable in life. Actions that are disintegrated, at odds with themselves, are difficult to trust. They do not seem unreservedly committed, and so do not win unreserved assent. Efforts to resolve the problem have served mostly to exacerbate it. Musicians have tended to burrow ever deeper into their texts, while theater workers have brought to bear a melange of contemporary training techniques, many of which purport to restore the performer's creative integrity by freeing him from the text. You'll recall that in the exercises I described in the last episode, there was one among several that involved freeing or releasing the singer from his involvement, his bond to the text. This contradiction is carried through in the ways creators prepare their texts. Composers have tended toward ever more elaborate micromanagement of interpretive choice in their scoring, while playwrights, on the whole, have moved toward carte blanche. In perfect consistency with this, performing musicians periodically raise the bar on reproductive precision with notations and articulations, while actors proscribe as overly restrictive stage directions, intonational suggestions, even scansion and punctuation. In opera, this bifurcation of the text is now almost routine, with close, though in truth often quite selective, observation of musical instructions on one side and a willful ignorance of theatrical instructions on the other. Theater workers deserve credit for at least recognizing the dichotomies as artistic problems and providing some energy for attacking them. But they have failed to take singing itself, classically structured singing of theatrical format, as the central component of operatic action. Instead, they have either attempted to redefine singing to avoid the rigors of the classical model, or to hope that this model can somehow be reconciled to the contemporary actor's state of being. Neither approach nurtures an environment in which great singing in any of its traditional definitions is at all likely to take place. Words are central components of nearly all sung actions. Of course, it is possible, even in opera, to commit actions wordlessly, either through music or through physical behavior. Generally speaking, though, opera is a form that doesn't do that. Singing implies the presence of words, without which it is vocalization and instrumental expression. The relationship between words and notes is not simple and is not fixed. Either can constitute a bounded field for the other. Either can be a first choice the other must interpret. In opera, it is more often than not the case that the librettist's choices impel those of the composer, that the words suggest the actions while the music suggests how the actions are carried out. But there are many exceptions to and complications of this usage. What is important from the singing acting standpoint is that both words and notes are bound into the actions. They are a unity in the service of dramatic intent. The singing actor's basis for carrying out actions is not the same as the theater actor's. The difference between the two is more than a heightening. Much of it has to do with the state of being already discussed, and much else has to do with the word-note relationship. Words convey meaning in two ways. The first, usually called the denotative, is through identification of an object or function for which the word has become the agreed-upon symbol. We can codify such meanings and look them up. In the present context, the second level of verbal meaning is best called inflective or intonational. Contained within it is everything that can be conveyed through melody, rhythm, timbre, and stress or accent. Everything, in other words, that has to do with music that we would call musical. This is the level on which interpretation takes place. While it is theoretically possible to deal with words in their purely symbolic function, in practice, words, even when read silently, cannot be detached from some inflectional quality, and therefore from interpretation. Relative to spoken usages, Singing emphasizes the inflectional at the expense of the denotative. This does not mean the inflectional is always more completely realized in singing than in speech. Indeed, certain nuances of spoken expression are coarsened or even foreclosed by singing. Moreover, the singing actor operates within a field where interpretive choices the theater actor would regard as his essential property have already been assigned. The singing actor's line readings, unquote, are roughly in place in the musical text. Melodic rise and fall, dynamic contour, rhythmic pulse and tempo, even details of accent or timbral shading are specifically and concretely present, not merely implied, and he is obligated to them in a way the theater actor is not. And I have a marginal query here concerning this relationship between what I'm calling the denotative and the inflectional, between speech usages and singing ones. And especially, I gather, my suggestion that although an advantage of the classically developed singing voice is its great expansion of inflectional range, it doesn't always prove superior with certain kinds of inflection, and often is inferior with the denotative, that is, with just conveying the manifest meanings of words in ways that sound natural. We're all familiar with that aggravation, I think. I wonder if I can illustrate this by recalling my work a few years back with two young women, actresses with no big ambition as singers, but seeking greater strength and command with their speaking voices, and a lessening of terror with an audition that called for some bit of singing. They were both talented and came for individual singing lessons, but then also for joint sessions to work on speech for the theater. I had them start with exercises on the formations of sounds, drawn from 19th century books on elocution and rhetoric. So I called them the elocutionettes, which was for sure an act they could have taken on the road, and then proceeded to to speeches from plays, classical and modern, and to poetry, with an emphasis on inflectional range and scansion. And then I asked them to pick a favorite poem and set it to music. Not a complete composition, of course, but just a melodic and rhythmic line that expressed the way they heard the poem. That is, of course, different from reading the poem for meaning, and begins to change the meaning once you stretch into the rise and fall, the stoppings and goings of even a simple musical line. They picked good poems, some of some depth and personal meaning to them, and I was quite astonished at the inventiveness and feeling of their settings. When they returned to spoken recitation of their poems, the readings were both emotionally richer and much clearer in terms of sense, because they'd had to confront all the questions of how should this next bit go, and had brought back to the text a measure of the color, urgency, and nuance they discovered through singing. So that's all good. They had gained something and really lost nothing. However, suppose I had insisted they press on into legit, unquote, territory with their singing, and they had been able to do so. I think we might now have encountered in the singing of their poem settings all the complaints along the lines of too operatic that we hear repeatedly from our friends across the aisle in the music theater party, or from popular music fans brought up on stylings for the microphone, or for that matter, from connoisseurs of art song, when large operatic voices invade their precincts. These protests all have to do with the loss of the natural, or of the understated, a range of inflection that tends to be canceled out by sonorous, dramatically profiled singing. And of course, this development of the voice would enhance certain kinds of speech, a certain compass of meaning and effect, but would not always benefit others. Now back to the essayette, where I had been discussing how composers impose line readings and other interpretive obligations on singers in ways that playwrights do not on actors. But though the singing actor cedes this interpretive ground to the creator, he acquires in exchange vast expressive territories, all lying within the domain of inflection and intonation. These are in turn dependent on the two innate advantages of the singing voice over the speaking voice, its wider pitch range and its capacity for sustained tone that can be elastically shaped. Together, these attributes carry the technically proficient singer-actor into a realm of expression that incorporates abstract elements of color and intensity. These are the elements of voice in its purely musical function, of voice as an instrument whose color range is an extension of vowel formation. This new expressive range explores the entire spectrum of affect beyond words, where sparks can be incorporated and interpreted by a receptor, but not verbally defined. We think of it as the range of the inexpressible, but this is not true, for music expresses it. Yet, in singing, expression seldom makes a clean escape into the abstract. It is tied to the word, to the denotative, and in fact contains the denotative within it. It is distinct from speech in its pull toward the musically abstract and its adventurous exploration of the inflective. It is distinct from instrumental music in its pull toward the verbal and its persistent recollection of the denotative. Some singing pulls far in one direction, some in the other. But without these distinctions, there would be no reason to sing anything. In singing acting, singing is put to dramatic purpose. Strings of word notes carry out dramatic actions. Although the singer-actor's state of being and expressive range differ from those of the theater actor, his essential task is the same. Walter Felsenstein, the great founder and for many, many years, 35 years or so, the director-producer of the Komische Oper in Berlin, seeking to define the dramatic function of music and singing, put it very well. It is, quote, to transform an action through music and singing into a theatrical reality that is unreservedly plausible. Yet no operatic action can render satisfaction without placing singing itself at its core and granting it full inflectional freedom. And there we are at an end of essayette number 8, ready for essayette number 9, called The Character, which will be coming up next time. Thanks.